Learning to knit a rib pattern is great, as it can make a nice neat border to a piece. The rib also gives a bit more stretch, which is handy when making a sweater or ribbed cuff, or a hat. Knitting a rib is very straightforward and just involves 2 knitting stitches, knitting and purling. The main issue is remembering which one you're doing. So first of all, I'll show you how to do a 1x1 rib, or K1P1. I've already cast on my first row, and I've cast on an even number of stitches, so that I start every row with a knit stitch and end each row with a purl stitch. This is important if you'll be joining your piece together and want the rib to look seamless, alternating between knitting and purl stitches. So, knit your first stitch, which means wool at the back of your work, and insert your right needle from the front to the back of your knitting, and just knit normally. Then, because your next stitch is a purl stitch, bring your wool to the front of your work between your 2 needles. Then purl this second stitch. So insert your needle from the back to the front of your knitting, wrap your wool around your right needle, and purl as usual. Once you've done that purl stitch, take the wool to the back of your knitting again and knit the next stitch. It's really important that you remember to move the wool to the back before you knit a stitch, and that you bring your wool to the front before you purl a stitch. The most common mistake when knitting a rib is moving the wool at the wrong time, and it can then form an extra loop on your needle, which will look like an extra stitch. Here it is again. Wool to the back of your work, insert your right needle into the front leg of the stitch on your left needle, and knit a stitch like normal. Then yarn to the front in between your 2 knitting needles, insert your right needle into the front leg of the stitch on your left needle, just like normal, purl a stitch. And continue this knit 1, purl 1 pattern until the end of the row. Then, when you switch to your next row, you'll just carry on with that knit 1, purl 1 pattern again. And as you continue to knit, you'll notice that the knit stitches will be sitting on top of the knit stitches, and the purls on top of the purls. If you had cast on an uneven number of stitches to start with, you just have to remember to keep the knit stitches on top of each other and the purls on top of each other, which will mean starting every other row with a purl stitch. So this is a K1P1 rib, and a 2x2 or K2P2 rib will give this slightly chunkier pattern. So for K2P2, with your wool to the back, knit the first 2 stitches. Then bring your wool to the front and purl a stitch, and purl the next stitch with your wool still to the front. Then wool to the back to continue with knit 2. If you've cast on a number of stitches divisible by 4, when you get to the next row, you'll start with knit 2 and then purl 2, so that the knit stitches sit on top of each other and the purls on top of the purls. Here's an example of K4P4 or knit 4 purl 4, and it gives a much wider, chunkier rib. And for this you'll need to knit 4 stitches, bring your wool to the front, then purl 4 stitches, then wool to the back, knit 4 stitches, and carry on like that. The 2 main things to remember when knitting a rib is, make sure the wool is at the back before you knit a stitch, and that it's to the front before you purl a stitch. And on each row, your knit stitches should sit above each other and your purl stitches should sit above each other. You can either remember this by counting which stitch you should be doing, or you can see that the knitted stitches sit at the back and have this little V shape around them, and the purl stitches have these lump around them like they're wearing a scarf. And that's all you need to know to knit a rib.